Holly, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you. How have you been?
Thanks. I've been good.
As you reflect back, and I'm sure as every year goes by, and a lot of like the documentary was like kind of talked about like Hugh Hefner's legacy,
Yeah.
versus like what he wanted his legacy to be versus, what it is. And I'm curious, like now that time has passed, like what do you think from your perspective? Do you think the legacy of Hugh Hefner and specifically Playboy should be, and like what is it to you?
Oh my God. I mean, I wouldn't even go out there and say what I think it should be because to me, when I go back and think about it, it's so overwhelming and kind of like this traumatic way that it's like I kind of like shut out everything else, like what everybody else thinks about it. For me, when I shared my story, it was just important for me to share everything about it, like the bad things as well as the good things, because on Girls Next Door, our lifestyle was packaged to look just very fun and happy and almost like family friendly in a way. And after I left the show, I was kind of like, you just going out living my life. And I run into people every day who would come up to me and just have assumptions about my life or think they knew how things were. And it really started to bother me after a while because I felt like when I would just respond to these people and say what I thought was the nice thing to say, like, oh yeah, everybody's great or whatever, I started to feel like I was living a lie. And it just really started to weigh on me. A strange thing kind of happened toward the end of the relationship where the other girls were leaving and it was just me. And he started to get really verbally abusive toward me because he no longer had like the other girls around to kind of like, he liked to, encourage drama between the other girls and he didn't have that anymore. So it was just me realizing that he was the problematic one. Like I could no longer say, oh, I'm miserable here because of the other girls. Oh, if the other girls weren't so mean. Not that Bridget or Kendra were mean. There was a long history of like other women that lived there before that. So I don't want anybody to think I'm talking about either of them. But for a long time, I made excuses saying, oh, it's just the other girls. If they weren't here, this could be a fun situation. But then when it was just me and him, I realized,
He was the
oh,
drama.
yeah, like this is what I'm dealing with and I can't do it anymore. I always really wanted to be in Playboy. I thought the pictorials were really beautiful. And if I would have just done that, that would have been me owning my sexuality. But in the situation I was in, like we weren't even paid for the first season of shows. They just like expected us to do it for free. We had a lot of really restricted rules on us. And I think when I entered into the situation, I thought I was empowered and I thought I was making a choice, but I let myself fall into a situation where I had zero control. So for my particular situation, I can own certain things. Like I'm comfortable with nudity in certain situations and I wanted to be in the magazine and I think the pictorials are really beautiful, but there was so much else that I just felt like I had no agency whatsoever.
I don't believe in regrets, but I believe in like learning from our experiences. How do you feel about, I guess, everything you've been through as you are now? You're wildly successful, popular. You got two, wonderful children. Like, how do you see your experience and what's like the overall like biggest lesson that you sit down and think, like I learned that, and that's with regardless of what I've been through, it really sticks with me to this day.
How would Hugh have described the house dynamic and how would he have described you specifically, like to his buddies?
He would have described, all his girlfriends as just being like in love with him and me being really in love with him and devoted and everybody's here living their dreams.
He kind of, he seemed like it's like his way of answering criticism was like to paint this like fantastical picture of like happiness and if everything just feels good and like, why is that bad? It's like at first it sounds good, but when you peel back the layers, you're just like, I'm not so sure,
Yeah,
maybe.
absolutely.
Yeah.
He knew really well how to walk that line too.
Yeah.
For anybody who's not caught up, essentially JoJo Siwa did a TikTok where she named Candace Cameron as her last name always trips me up, so I'm just going to call her Candace Cameron Bure, CCB, the rudest celebrity she's ever met. There's been a lot of back and forth between the two of them, but basically what the interaction that is like the center of this accusation is that when JoJo Siwa was 11, she asked to take a photo with Candace. Candace said no. JoJo Siwa claims that she then saw Candace taking photos with other children, and that was part of what made the experience hurtful. I'm curious, like, as a public figure, I think it gets into a larger question of, like, to what extent do celebrities, like, owe us their attention or moments of their time?
I'm curious your thoughts. I I think this story is bonkers.
Who says no to a kid though? When
She
you're on a
also
red
said, for
carpet?
context, she said not right now.
Maybe in that moment, Candace
had
could-
something else to do. Was being pulled away.
or was rude. Or
Yeah.
maybe she could have been more considerate. 8 years go by, and then 19-year-old JoJo Siwa, who's got 34 million followers on TikTok, just decides to be like, you know what? I'm going to call Candace Bure the rudest celebrity I've ever met for something that I experienced when I was 11. That's a lot.
But isn't there, I feel like there's a little part of you that like in fantasizing about if you grew, like, at least for me, like in thinking about, oh, if I one day had like a following or prominence, being like, and all the people who wronged me, like I can spill the tea on it.
No, I get
So
it.
there's
but
a
I
certain
just,
degree to that, like maybe JoJo gets ownership of that experience, or do we think it's like
listen,
very inappropriate for her to?
I had the pleasure of interviewing her once. She was wonderfully delightful, and she seems very sweet and outgoing. But I just think we have to be careful with like our expectations of people, and if they don't meet up with those expectations of us, like that doesn't mean they're bad people.
Yeah, I think sometimes when people see you on TV, they feel like they know you, and they feel, without even knowing they feel this way, they feel like you should know them back. Like I feel like I've met a lot of people over the years, and sometimes people have been disappointed because I'm not like I'm always polite, but maybe they've been disappointed because I'm not like, oh my God, it's so good to see you. Like they're
Yeah.
almost expecting something different than just a parasocial relationship. It's like they almost feel like, well, you should know me too.